Okay, so I'll just do a brief overview of the history of the fair trade certification system in case people aren't familiar with it. This is the label here. Okay, this is the label here. So this is what you're looking for to ensure third-party certification, fair trades. This is what it looks like. And Fair Trade Initiative began in the Netherlands, and it offered a standardized system of fair trade criteria that hadn't been seen before in this sort of organized way. And then in 1997, the Fair Labor Organization began to work with other countries. So Transfair USA is the group that I'll be talking about today. You'll hear me mention them, and this is their label. They're the one that certifies in the US. I think Jeff, in his presentation, might have a picture of the label for the UK. So it is in different countries and they have different labels. But it's different from something like Rainforest Alliance, and the difference is that it's a third party. So it's not connected to the actual, there's no vested interest there. So it's sort of like a guarantee to the consumer that it's in the best interest of the workers and the environment, and not a corporation or a particular group that has some sort of agenda otherwise. Okay, so here are some of the things that currently you can buy that are fair trade. You see bananas there at the top. Of course, coffee is pretty easy to find here. And chocolate, which we'll be talking about today as well. Actually, there's a lot of connections between bananas, coffee, and chocolate in Latin America. So at Global Exchange, we focus on chocolate, and I'll tell you why a little bit later. But the things that I'll be talking about are really applicable to all those three commodities. Sometimes you can also find crafts, which are not under this certification system, but try to adhere to the same standards.
Sorry. I'm a teacher, so I'm used to just talking in the classroom. I'm not used to a microphone, so I apologize.
Okay, so why should we buy fair trade? What is this fair trade thing all about? I'm going to do an activity with you now that I wasn't sure of the audience today, and so it's geared a little bit more toward elementary or middle school students, but could be adapted to high school or the college level, depending. So we're going to buy some bananas now and learn a little bit about what fair trade means. I need 4 people to volunteer, and what that entails is you will be one of our banana purchasers, and you will be doing just a brief bit of reading to the group. So are there 4 people that might be willing to help out with this activity? Come on, it'll be fun. Oh, great. You can just stay seated for now, and then I need 2 more people. Come on, teachers. Okay, there we go. Thank you. Okay, so I'm going to ask one person to come on up and use their voucher to buy a banana. And you could use real bunches of bananas in this activity. You can also do it with like a coffee cup. I've seen it done with coffee, with a chocolate bar, so you can apply it to different commodities depending on what you're teaching about or what you want to instruct someone about. Okay, you're here for a banana.
Yes, please.
Here you go. So go ahead and peel open the banana, and what did you find in your banana?
Poverty.
Poverty. Did you want to get poverty with your banana?
No, I just wanted the potassium.
Unfortunately, poverty comes along with the banana. And then go ahead and read for us what's in there.
Constant pressure to cut prices and production costs on banana plantations has dramatically driven down workers' wages. The quality of life for workers is deteriorating. Many workers do not earn enough to cover basic needs for themselves or for their families.
Okay, so here's a little bit more about the poverty that goes on some of these plantations in some of these countries where people are growing bananas, and also with coffee and chocolate, like I mentioned. So, for example, an 8-hour day in Costa Rica, what was mentioned earlier by Jean, is that it went from $250 to $187. While, when the cost of living remains the same, you can imagine, what that might do if you kind of try to apply that to your own life. So in Ecuador, for example, it costs about $9.60 to raise a family, to meet the needs for your family. But they may earn as little as $2 a day. I've been told that sometimes, workers are paid pennies for their work. Workers in Nicaragua earn as little as $1.20 for an 8-hour workday. And so what happens a lot of times, coupled with something else I'll mention in a little bit, is that these people really become migrants. And they're actually, they can't afford homes. Certainly children are not oftentimes going to school, and sometimes it's difficult just to even get food. And clean water is another issue, which we'll talk about a little bit later. So unfortunately, there is a lot of poverty that comes along with our delicious bananas that we enjoy here. Okay, we need another person to come on up and buy a banana.
I would like to buy a banana.
Okay, here you go.
All right.
And what did you find in your banana?
Oh, labor exploitation.
Ooh, labor exploitation. Did you want labor exploitation with your banana?
Many plantation workers work between 12 and 14 hours a day with unpaid overtime. Wholesalers and retailers take most of the profits in unfair banana trade. Plantations get 10% of the retail price, while workers get only a fraction.
So this is another big issue that I'm assuming maybe you heard about this morning, the exploitation that goes on, especially with these large corporations. It's really just another piece of what we're seeing with globalization, that as big corporations take over and make more and more profit, and as the price of these things go down in order to provide us with cheap commodities, which unfortunately are not cheap at all for other people in our planet. It's just that the cost, is externalized, so we don't see it, and we think, wow, I got these bananas and it was such a great deal. Well, really the cost is really high, and this is the same for a lot of these different commodities. It's just that we don't see it, and I'm sure you may have heard of, I don't know if you've heard of the term externalized cost, but that's what's involved here. So the biggest, I've listed the 5 corporations that control about 85% of the banana market. So you can imagine there's only 15% left over, and so that creates a lot of competition in order to keep these small farms alive. It's very difficult for them to actually, earn a living on these small farms. And there's not a lot of security or protection. There's actually, most of these corporations and countries discourage unionizing, they discourage organizing, and so really it's a human rights issue, it's a labor rights issue, it's an economic justice issue. So it's connected to so many other important issues. Another thing too that they do is they offer these 6-month contracts. And so then that forces the people, sometimes they've moved from their families, they've moved from, far away to come work, and then sometimes they don't even know that they're going to be let go, and they could be let go at any time. And then it actually contributes to another piece we'll talk about later, because it forces them into slash and burn agriculture to survive during those off times that they're not hired. Okay, so another banana.
Ask a question real quick. Like, what's the profit margins on bananas right now? How much leeway are these corporations they're just economies of scale, right? They're literally, per every banana, they're not making that much money, they're just selling so many bananas that's how they're making their money. So when it's on the consumers then to actually change, be willing to pay more.
Exactly. That's the whole concept of externalized cost, is that we need to be willing to take some of that cost on us. And the more that we're willing to do that, so the more that you're willing to purchase fair trade, then, the hope is it will shift. But as you can see, it's sort of a monopoly at this point, and I'm sure you talked a lot about that this morning. But I don't know the exact numbers, so I am going to be providing some websites if you want to find out more information. But I don't at this moment know the exact amount that people are paid, so I don't want to misrepresent it. But that's a really good question. That's a lot of what we need to be asking and bringing up, so that's good. Okay, so another person. Okay, there you go. Enjoy.
Ooh,
And what did you find in your banana?
environmental degradation. And it says plantations have increasingly relied on pesticides and fungicides in order to meet consumers' demand for the perfect banana. Conventional plantations apply about 30 pounds of chemical pesticides per acre each year. Workers and the environment are harmed by these pesticides.
Yes, so it's a lot of what the film was indicating. And I'm going to attempt to explain a little bit more about, it's very, very complex, bananas and environmental degradation. Bananas, coffee, and cocoa are all what we call shade-grown plants naturally in nature. That's their genetic makeup, is to be grown under a forest canopy and in a diverse polycultural situation, which means a lot of different kinds of plants. And so what happens with bananas as well as the cocoa and the coffee is that they're grown in what's called a monoculture or monocropping. Are people familiar with monocropping? So what happens is that the trees, because they're grown so close together and because there's not that diversity, they're much more susceptible to disease. They're already a pretty fragile crop as it is, and so they're very susceptible to pests and disease. And it's very easy for it to spread in these plantations situations when, it's just row upon row and tree upon tree. And so that's one of the reasons that so many pesticides, more than many other crops, need to be sprayed on them. Another issue is, of course, that the forest is cleared to make room for these plantations. And the soil in the rainforest is a very thin layer of topsoil, and it's actually not very good. The way that the soil becomes productive is from all the things that fall in the forest onto the forest floor. So it's really all the other leaves and the fungus and the insects, all of it working together that make the soil productive. So what you're doing is you're depleting the soil, and then you're causing erosion because it doesn't have that layer to protect the soil. And so then that's sending the pesticides into the water sources. So not only are you polluting the actual plantation and the plants around it, but the water sources as well, which spreads everywhere. So this is a much larger issue than contained within the plantation. So when you're thinking about long-term sustainability, really fair trade is an investment in the long-term sustainability of the planet. It is a way, it's very connected. The environmental sustainability movement is very connected to fair trade. Fair trade is a really great entryway if you want to get involved in something, because it does touch on it connects all those dots. You're really dealing with environmental issues, you're dealing with human rights, you're dealing with economic justice and social justice, you're dealing with child labor. And so when you get involved in fair trade and doing something about that, you're really helping out in a lot of different areas. So for me, it was like kind of a natural thing. Well, gosh, there's so many issues and so much work to be done with globalization, and what's the one area where I can really make a lot of impact? And so as a teacher, I just thought, well, this is an area that introducing to kids and adults to this as soon as possible and starting to work together on these issues will really make a large impact. And then, of course, the health impacts, not only on animals and the environment, but the people that are actually living in these areas. So that's a real human rights issue. Okay, and then the last banana is our last version. Now we might find something a little different inside this one.
Okay.
Okay, sorry.
Ooh, fair trade.
Wow, so do we want fair trade? Yes.
Okay. Fair trade certification ensures that workers receive fair and stable pay for their work. It enables them to earn enough to cover basic needs. It also includes an additional premium that is invested in the community for schools, better farming practices, or other improvements.
Okay, so what is fair trade all about? Thank you so much. Thanks for participating, everybody that did. So fair trade is, you may already know this or not, this is kind of an overview because I didn't really know how much people knew or not. But it offers a set price for the commodity. So, bananas fall into that as well. And also ensures that certain labor conditions are met. So certain hours in the workday, certain minimum age that people, it doesn't allow for forced child labor. It doesn't allow for slavery, which does still exist. There's quite a bit of modern day slavery going on out there. It's a direct trade. It takes out a lot of the middlemen. And actually a lot of these fair trade farms are cooperatives. So it's people coming together to work together and for the common good of the community and the surroundings, and really deciding, there's a lot of democracy that happens because it's really deciding as a community, like, what do we want, what do we need? And so there is an additional premium, and that's why, yes, it is more expensive to buy fair trade. But like I said, it's really, you're really doing your part to ensure sustainability for the planet when you pay that extra premium. Because what happens is the cooperative gets together and they decide, do we need a school? Do we want to go and study organic farming practices? Do we need to work on our water system? And so that gets put back and invested in the community. Also, the environmental sustainability piece is huge. So if, right now people are really focused on environmental sustainability, and this is directly connected. It's directly connected to climate change, the climate crisis, into the degradation of the planet and species as well. So I'm going to turn this over to Jeff for a few minutes, and he's going to talk about what he learned when he was down in the Dominican Republic.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Jeff Kaloustian. I am a law student at the University of San Francisco, and I had a great opportunity just earlier this summer to, can everyone hear me okay? Okay. I was part of a student delegation that went down to the Dominican Republic on a kind of a human rights fact-finding and field investigation trip. Most of the work that we were doing was aimed at looking at the living conditions of Haitian migrants that live in the Dominican Republic. As Anne mentioned, actually, a lot of the people that work in the agricultural sector in Latin America are migrants, and that's definitely the case in the Dominican Republic. Probably at least half, if not more, of the agricultural workers in the Dominican are of Haitian descent. So the link to fair trade with this human rights delegation that went down to the Dominican Republic, it has really been explained by Anne already. A lot of human rights issues are implicated in the production of agricultural products in the developing world. And so our delegation had a chance to visit a fair trade banana farm and training center in the northern part of the Dominican Republic outside of Santiago. So it's noted with the red arrow there. And this is one activity that we did on this trip. So what we were able to do while we were there was talk to the gentleman who hosted us by the name of Mr. Nunez. I'll have a picture of him in a second, about the specific practices that they were using to implement the fair trade standards at their farm and training center in the Dominican Republic. And as Anne mentioned, this is actually the logo that's used throughout Europe, and I think that on an international standard, people are trying to move to this fair trade logo symbol here. So when we looked at the actual stickers that they put on the bananas down in the Dominican Republic, it's this image right here. So some of the specific practices that we saw in place at this particular banana farm were, we've talked a lot, even in the last half an hour, about pesticides and how most of them are chemically based. To get a fair trade certification at this farm, you have to use organic pesticides. That's kind of a standard sort of environmental criteria for fair trade certification. Also, you can see this picture is a picture of basically what I would call a banana bath. They had all pre-ripened bananas in these pools. And you can see the water is being piped in and filtered, and the banana wash is happening with filtered water, which would not be required if it was a conventional banana farm. And then no chemical storage on site at these farms as well too. So from my understanding, I'm assuming that there are some chemically based fertilizers that are used, So this isn't synonymous with necessarily an organic farm, but the move is towards environmental sustainability. And they did mention that there can be no chemical storage on these farms if they want fair trade certification. And they also have a composting system, kind of a waste management system that's an expectation of part of their fair trade certification. This is the gentleman that hosted us, Mr. Nunez, and these are two of the workers there at the farm. A couple of the worker benefits that we were able to talk about were, as Ann mentioned, fair wages, and then a whole plethora of health and safety protections for the workers, including protective gear, if they are in the situation of needing anything to protect them from any substances. Also, hygiene, access to facilities, on-site living quarters are also habitable with basic services, and they have dedicated eating facilities. So this is a way to look at really the quality of life of the workers on the Dominican farms, on these fair trade farms. And this is a major element of fair trade certification. This is kind of human criteria, not only with wages, but also with health and safety protections for the workers. One interesting thing we learned also is that for the fair trade banana certification in the Dominican Republic, it is linked to an international standard called Global GAP or Euro GAP, which is GAP stands for Good Agricultural Practices. So this is actually a way for them to link the fair trade standard with another pre-existing international standard. As you all probably know, the folks in Europe are very conscious of the impacts of their food. They're very against GMOs, genetically modified foods. There also seems to be a higher level of consciousness with sustainability in the food sector in Europe. So there is a huge public demand for more knowledge about the source of food products and what kind of impacts that they're creating in the environment out there. So this GAP initiative was kind of an outgrowth of, or a response to public sentiment that was looking for more information about impacts of agricultural practices and the source, what kind of sourcing of food products is happening in products that are coming into Europe. So there's a website here if you want to find out more about Global GAP, and I can just read you real briefly. The Global GAP standard is primarily designed to reassure consumers about how food is produced on the farm by minimizing detrimental environmental impacts of farming operations, reducing the use of chemical inputs, and ensuring responsible approach to worker health and safety as well as animal welfare. So there is inherently a lot of overlap with fair trade, a set of fair trade standards that you would expect to see in this context. And then benefits to small-scale producers is a huge element of fair trade. In a very concrete sense, small-scale producers are getting $1 more per box for their bananas in the Dominican Republic. And a major aspect of that is really market access. By teaming up with other small-scale producers in the area through farming cooperatives, small-scale producers that would not otherwise have access to high-value international markets are hereby enabled to get into a higher-value international market, because the biggest markets for fair trade bananas are going to be in the European Union and in the United States. So in terms of poverty alleviation and really creating sustainability for business and sustainable kind of wages for families and for small businesses is a huge part of the economic sustainability piece. Comes in the benefits to small-scale producers, particularly through market access. And I think that's it for me. With backspace? Perfect. Okay. So that's my piece. Thank you.